The grand concert hall buzzed with excitement as the final notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor hung in the air. For a breathless moment, silence enveloped the room before thunderous applause erupted. The renowned pianist rose from his bench, his tall figure commanding the stage as he bowed deeply, a practiced smile gracing his lips. This was just another standing ovation for Anton Petrovich, a man whose fingers had danced across piano keys on the most prestigious stages around the world. At 45, his dark hair now showed distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, adding to his aura of mastery. Critics called him the modern-day Liszt, praising his technical perfection and passionate interpretations. Tonight's performance in the small town of Riverdale seemed almost beneath someone of his caliber. But the local arts foundation had offered an impressive sum, and his manager insisted the publicity of bringing world-class music to everyday people would enhance his image. So here he was in a concert hall that, while respectable, couldn't compare to the opulent venues he typically graced. After his third curtain call, Anton retreated backstage, wiping his brow with a monogrammed handkerchief. His assistant handed him a glass of sparkling water with lemon, never too cold, just as he preferred. "They loved you," his assistant gushed. "The reception starts in 20 minutes at the community center across the street. The major donors are eager to meet you." Anton nodded, already mentally preparing for the tedious small talk ahead. These post-concert gatherings always followed the same pattern. Wealthy patrons fishing for personal connections, amateur musicians seeking validation, and the inevitable questions about his practice routine. He could navigate these conversations in his sleep. The community center had been transformed for the evening. Crystal chandeliers had been brought in to replace the usual fluorescent lighting. White tablecloths covered folding tables which held elegant displays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. Local volunteers, dressed in their finest attire, looked both proud and nervous as they welcomed the town's elite and their distinguished guest. Anton entered fashionably late, pausing at the doorway to allow his presence to be noticed. The room quickly quieted as heads turned his way. The town mayor approached immediately, hand extended. "Maestro Petrovich, what an absolute honor. Your performance tonight was nothing short of magical." Anton offered a practiced smile. "Thank you. The acoustics of your hall are surprisingly adequate." If the mayor noticed the backhanded compliment, he didn't show it. Instead, he began guiding Anton through the crowd, introducing him to board members and major donors. The pianist shook hands mechanically, accepting praise with rehearsed humility while internally counting the minutes until he could retreat to his hotel suite. "Have you tried the appetizers?" "Our local chef studied in Paris," a board member's wife informed him, as if this might impress him after his recent month-long tour of Europe. "Not yet, but I look forward to it," he lied smoothly, having no intention of eating anything prepared in a community center kitchen, regardless of the chef's credentials. The evening continued predictably. A young music student asked for advice, which Anton provided with rehearsed wisdom about dedication and practice. A wealthy businessman tried to impress him with talk of his rare piano collection. A local music teacher spoke nervously about how she had analyzed his recordings. With her advanced students, Anton had just excused himself to refresh his drink, a tactic to gain a moment's respite, when he felt a light tap on his arm. He turned to find an elderly woman smiling up at him. She must have been in her mid-70s, with soft white hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her clothes were neat but plain, a blue dress that had probably been her good outfit for many years, and sensible shoes that spoke of practicality rather than fashion. Around her neck hung a small worn silver locket. "That was the most beautiful Chopin I've heard in years," she said, her voice warm and slightly weathered by age. "You made the piano sing tonight." Anton gave her the smile he reserved for well-meaning amateurs, polite but distant. "Thank you. Chopin requires a certain sensitivity many pianists lack." "Oh yes," she agreed eagerly, "especially in that passage where the G minor theme returns. The way you handled the left hand." She hummed a few notes, her eyes closing briefly. "It reminded me of how the rain sounds on an old tin roof. So much longing there." Something in her description caught his attention, not for its technical accuracy but for its genuine emotional response. Still, he'd heard plenty of poetic interpretations of his playing from people who couldn't tell a nocturne from a sonata. "Music speaks to everyone differently," he replied diplomatically. "But that's what makes Chopin universal, isn't it?" She continued, seemingly unaware of his growing disinterest. He captures feelings we all know but can't put into words. That moment when you slowed just before the coda, I could feel my heart catching in my chest. A nearby group of patrons, a local bank president, the head of the Arts Foundation, and several other well-dressed individuals had drifted closer, champagne glasses in hand. They were clearly amused by the interaction between the world-famous pianist and this ordinary-looking old woman. "Are you familiar with Chopin's work?" Anton asked, his tone slightly condescending. "Oh, I've known his pieces all my life," she answered simply. "They're like old friends now," the bank president chuckled. "Mrs. Chen volunteers at our community music program. She's quite the enthusiast." "An enthusiast," Anton repeated, a hint of amusement creeping into his voice. The word was often used to describe well-meaning music lovers who lacked formal training. "And what did you think of the accelerando in the development section? Too liberal, perhaps?" A few of the onlookers exchanged knowing glances. It was clear the pianist was now showing off, using terminology the elderly woman wouldn't understand. Mrs. Chen hesitated for just a moment. "I thought it was nice, very fast fingers." This elicited barely concealed smirks from several listeners. Anton felt a surge of superiority, followed immediately by a twinge of shame that he quickly suppressed. "Well, there's quite a bit of technical complexity there," he explained, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. "The polyrhythmic structure Chopin employs creates tension that must be resolved through precise modulation of tempo. It's not just about fast fingers, as you put it." The Arts Foundation director leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made them both stifle laughs. Mrs. Chen nodded politely, seemingly unaware of the subtle mockery. "I'm sure you're right. I just know what moves me. That's the beauty of music, isn't it?" The bank president interjected with exaggerated kindness. "Even those without formal training can enjoy it on some level." Anton seized the opportunity. "Absolutely. Just as one can appreciate a beautiful sunset without understanding meteorology." He turned back to Mrs. Chen. "The emotional response is valid, even without comprehension of the technical elements." The group around them had grown larger now, drawn by the spectacle of the famous pianist engaging with the elderly volunteer. Many wore expressions of second-hand embarrassment or barely concealed amusement. "Tell me," Anton continued, warming to his subject and the attention, "what did you think of my interpretation of the fioritura passages? Did they convey the appropriate emotional weight?" Mrs. Chen's eyes flickered briefly to the growing audience before returning to the pianist's face. "I'm not familiar with that word," she admitted quietly. "The ornamental runs," he explained with exaggerated patience, "the cascading notes that embellish the melodic line." He hummed a brief example, his fingers mimicking a keyboard in the air. "Ah," she nodded. "Those always remind me of water trickling over stones in a brook." A few people exchanged glances at her simple analogy. Someone stifled a laugh. "Interesting comparison," Anton said, his voice carrying a hint of indulgence, though of course Chopin was employing them as an extension of the bel canto singing style popularized in Italian opera of the period. The technical execution requires precise voicing to maintain the melodic integrity while executing the embellishments. As he spoke, he noticed several nods of appreciation from the more educated audience members. The woman simply listened, her expression attentive but increasingly uncomfortable as she became aware of her role in this impromptu performance. Not as a fellow appreciator of music, but as an unintentional foil to showcase the pianist's expertise. "I can see why you're considered a master," she said finally. "Your knowledge is as impressive as your playing." Something in her tone, a gentle dignity despite her discomfort, made Anton pause. For a fleeting moment he wondered if he had misjudged her, but before he could respond, the Arts Foundation director stepped forward. "Maestro Petrovich, there are several people eager to speak with you about the master class tomorrow. Would you mind?" She gestured toward another group waiting expectantly across the room. "Of course," Anton replied smoothly. He turned back to Mrs. Chen with a practiced smile. "It was a pleasure discussing music with you. Enjoy the rest of your evening." As he walked away, he overheard the bank president speaking to Mrs. Chen. "Don't feel bad. No one expects you to understand the technical aspects. That's why we have experts like Maestro Petrovich to interpret the music for us." Anton felt another flicker of discomfort at the patronizing tone, but quickly dismissed it. After all, wasn't the bank president simply stating facts? Not everyone could dedicate their lives to mastering an art form as he had done. He had earned his expertise through decades of rigorous study and sacrifice. As the evening continued, Anton found himself glancing occasionally at Mrs. Chen. She had moved to a quiet corner, speaking with a young server who seemed to know her well. Despite the awkward interaction, she appeared composed, occasionally smiling at something the young man said. For some reason, this bothered Anton more than if she had appeared upset. Little did he know that this seemingly insignificant encounter was about to change the course of his carefully cultivated career and challenge everything he thought he knew about music, expertise, and true understanding. The next morning, Anton woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains of his luxury hotel suite. His concert in Riverdale had been just one stop on his month-long North American tour, and tonight he would perform in the neighboring city before moving on to larger venues in more prestigious locations. As he sipped his precisely prepared coffee, 1 sugar, a splash of cream, he found his thoughts drifting back to the elderly woman from the reception. There was something about her that nagged at him. Perhaps it was the way she had maintained her dignity despite his condescension. Or maybe it was her genuine love for music, unrefined though it might be. He shook his head, dismissing these thoughts. He had encountered countless enthusiastic amateurs over the years. Why should this one linger in his mind? His phone chimed with a message from his assistant. The local music school had arranged for him to give a brief masterclass that afternoon, a commitment he had forgotten entirely. He sighed. These provincial obligations were tedious, but his manager insisted they were good for his public image. Giving back to the community looked excellent in press releases. 3 hours later, Anton walked into the modest music building attached to the community center. The space was clean but dated, with faded inspirational posters about music lining the hallways and the unmistakable sound of students practicing in distant rooms, some with more skill than others. The director of the music school, a nervous man with thinning hair and an ill-fitting suit, greeted him effusively. "Maestro Petrovich, such an honor to have you with us today. Our advanced students are absolutely thrilled for this opportunity." Anton nodded politely. "I'm happy to offer some guidance. How many students will I be working with?" "Just 3 of our most talented pupils," the director assured him. "We've selected them carefully and asked them to prepare pieces worthy of your expertise." They entered a modest recital room where about 20 people waited. The 3 students, their families, and several teachers. Anton noticed immediately that the piano was not up to his standards, a well-used upright, rather than a concert grand, but he had expected as much. The first student was a teenage boy who played a simplified version of a Beethoven sonata with technical correctness but little understanding of the emotional content. Anton provided some perfunctory advice about hand position and phrasing, though he doubted the boy would progress much further in his musical studies. The second student, a girl of about 16, showed more promise. Her rendition of a Debussy prelude demonstrated sensitivity, though her technique needed refinement. Anton spent more time with her, offering specific suggestions that brought immediate improvement to her playing. As the second student returned to her seat, the director stepped forward. "And now, our final student is actually our oldest current pupil. She began taking formal lessons just 5 years ago, after retiring from her job as a librarian." He gestured toward the back of the room. "Mrs. Chen, please come forward." Anton froze. Walking toward the piano was the same elderly woman from the reception, the one he had so casually dismissed. She wore a different outfit today, simple dark pants and a floral blouse, but carried herself with the same quiet dignity he remembered. Mrs. Chen nodded politely to Anton as she took her seat at the piano. If she recognized him or remembered their interaction from the previous evening, she gave no indication. The director leaned closer to Anton and whispered, "Mrs. Chen has become quite passionate about piano in her retirement. She practices more hours than many of our younger students." Anton nodded stiffly, suddenly uncomfortable. The woman placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, not the most technically challenging work, but one that required genuine emotional sensitivity. As her fingers moved across the keys, Anton's professional assessment began automatically. Her technique was obviously amateur. Her fingers lacked the strength and independence developed through years of training. Her tempo was inconsistent and she missed several notes in the more difficult passages. And yet, there was something in her playing that caught his attention. Beneath the technical flaws, he could hear a genuine understanding of the music's emotional core. Her interpretation of certain phrases showed an intuitive grasp of Chopin's intentions that even some professional pianists missed. In particular, the way she handled the central melody, with a singing quality that rose above the accompaniment, demonstrated real musicality. When she finished, there was warm applause from the small audience. Mrs. Chen nodded graciously before turning to Anton with an open, expectant expression. "Well," he began, choosing his words carefully, "there are certainly technical issues to address. Your left hand is not providing consistent support, and your rubato in the middle section was excessive." He demonstrated the proper technique on the piano, playing a brief passage with professional precision. Several audience members nodded appreciatively at the difference in quality. "However," Anton continued, surprising himself with what he was about to say, "your understanding of the melodic line shows genuine insight. The way you brought out the voice in this section," he played another few measures, "demonstrates good musical instinct." Mrs. Chen's face brightened at this unexpected praise. "Thank you," she said simply. "I love this piece very much. Why did you choose it?" Anton found himself asking, genuinely curious. "It reminds me of my husband," she replied, her fingers gently touching the small silver locket she wore. "He used to hum this melody while we worked in our garden together. He passed away 6 years ago. That's when I decided to finally learn piano, something I'd always wanted to do." The recital room fell quiet. The personal connection to the music explained the emotional authenticity in her playing. Despite her technical limitations, Anton cleared his throat, suddenly feeling the weight of his arrogance from the previous evening. "Music often carries our deepest emotions," he said, his usual pretension absent from his voice. Chopin understood that better than most composers. He turned to the piano and began playing the nocturne from the beginning, but with a deliberate shift in his approach. Rather than showcasing his technical mastery, he focused on the emotional quality Mrs. Chen had brought to certain phrases. His performance was technically flawless, as always, but now infused with a warmth inspired by her playing. When he finished, the small audience sat in stunned silence before erupting into enthusiastic applause. Several people dabbed at their eyes. "That was how it should sound," Mrs. Chen said softly when the applause had died down. "So beautiful." "No," Anton replied, surprising everyone, including himself. "That was how it sounds when played with technical precision. But there were moments in your performance that had something my playing often lacks." "What's that?" she asked. "Genuine heart," he answered honestly. "Technical perfection means nothing without emotional truth." The director, sensing a powerful teaching moment, stepped forward. "Perhaps Mrs. Chen would benefit from hearing more about your approach to emotional interpretation, maestro." And so, for the next 20 minutes, Anton found himself engaged in a genuine conversation about music with the woman he had dismissed so casually the night before. He spoke not as a superior instructing a novice, but as one music lover to another. Mrs. Chen asked thoughtful questions that revealed her deep, if informal, understanding of music. "The notes are just the skeleton," she observed at one point. "The music's soul comes from somewhere else." Anton nodded. Many technically proficient pianists never understand that distinction. As the masterclass concluded, Anton felt strangely reluctant to end the conversation. There was something refreshing about Mrs. Chen's perspective and authenticity, uncluttered by the pretensions that often dominated his professional world. The director approached as people began to leave the room. "Thank you so much, maestro. This was truly invaluable for our students." He lowered his voice slightly, "Especially for Mrs. Chen. She may be a late beginner, but her dedication is remarkable. Did you know she takes 2 buses to get here for her lessons? And she volunteers teaching music appreciation to children from low-income families, despite her limited formal training." Anton watched as Mrs. Chen gathered her sheet music, carefully placing it in a well-worn folder. "I'd like to speak with her for a moment before I leave," he told the director. As the room emptied, Anton approached Mrs. Chen, who was now alone by the piano. "Mrs. Chen, I want to apologize for my behavior at the reception last night." The words felt foreign on his tongue. Apologies were not something he offered often, I was dismissive of your understanding of music." That was unwarranted and unkind. She looked up at him, surprise evident in her eyes. "There's no need to apologize, Maestro. You were right about the technical aspects. I'm still learning." "We're all still learning," he replied, the platitude sounding unexpectedly sincere as he spoke it. "Your playing today reminded me of something important that I'd forgotten." She tilted her head curiously. "And what's that?" Anton struggled to articulate the feeling. That technical mastery is only valuable when it serves the music's deeper purpose. I've spent decades perfecting my technique, but sometimes I worry that I've lost sight of why I began playing in the first place. Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. It's easy to forget the simple joy of making music when you're focused on making it perfect. Her words struck him with unexpected force. When was the last time he had felt simple joy while playing? His performances were exercises in controlled perfection. His practice sessions focused entirely on technical flawlessness. The pleasure he derived came primarily from audience adulation and critical acclaim, not from the music itself. Before he could respond, the director reappeared at the door. "Maestro, your car's waiting to take you to your hotel." Anton nodded. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Mrs. Chen. "Thank you for the reminder," he said quietly. As he walked toward the door, she called after him. "Maestro?" He turned. "I'll be at your concert tonight in Clayton City. My niece is driving me there as a birthday present." She smiled. "I'm looking forward to hearing how you play the Beethoven." Anton felt a strange weight settle on his shoulders, the weight of knowing that at least one person in tonight's audience would be listening not just to his technique, but to his heart. The grand concert hall in Clayton City was significantly more impressive than the modest venue in Riverdale. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Plush red carpet lined the aisles, and the stage featured a magnificent 9-foot concert grand piano that had been specially tuned for tonight's performance. The audience, dressed in evening wear and expensive jewelry, filled the hall with excited chatter as they awaited the appearance of the world-renowned pianist. Backstage, Anton paced in his private dressing room, an unusual tension gripping him. He had performed in venues far more prestigious than this: Carnegie Hall, the Royal Albert Hall, the Berlin Philharmonie. Yet tonight, he felt an unfamiliar nervousness. 5 minutes. "Maestro," his assistant called through the door. Anton straightened his bow tie and smoothed his tailcoat. His reflection in the mirror showed the confident, distinguished artist the world expected to see. But inside, something had shifted since his encounter with Mrs. Chen earlier that day. Her words echoed in his mind. It's easy to forget the simple joy of making music when you're focused on making it perfect. When was the last time he had felt that joy? The question had haunted him all afternoon. His relationship with music had evolved over the decades from childlike wonder to disciplined study, then to professional ambition, and finally to the cold precision that now defined his playing. Somewhere along that journey, something essential had been lost. The stage manager knocked on his door. "We're ready for you, Maestro." Anton took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. As he approached, he could hear the rustling of the audience falling silent in anticipation. This moment, the hush before his entrance, usually filled him with a sense of power. Tonight it filled him with an unexpected question. Would Mrs. Chen hear something worth listening to in his performance? He strode onto the stage, acknowledging the applause with a practiced bow before taking his seat at the piano. The program began with a Bach prelude and fugue, a technical showcase that Anton could play practically in his sleep. His fingers found the keys automatically, executing the complex counterpoint with his usual precision. As he played, his eyes scanned the audience. The large hall was filled with over 1,000 people, making it impossible to identify individuals in the dim light. Was Mrs. Chen really out there listening? What would she hear in his playing? Technical brilliance or emotional emptiness? The Bach concluded to enthusiastic applause. Anton bowed slightly before launching into the centerpiece of his program, Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata. This was a work he had performed hundreds of times, a piece that critics often praised as the highlight of his concerts. Tonight, however, as he began the familiar opening notes, Anton found himself listening to his own playing with new ears. The notes were perfect, the dynamics precisely calibrated, the tempo exactly as marked in the score, but something was missing. The passion that gave the sonata its name felt mechanical, rehearsed rather than lived. Halfway through the first movement, Anton made a split-second decision. Instead of following his carefully rehearsed interpretation, he allowed himself to play the next passage as if hearing it for the first time. He lingered slightly on a poignant harmony, pushed forward through a moment of tension with greater urgency, allowed the melody to breathe in ways he hadn't permitted in years. The effect was subtle, probably imperceptible to most of the audience, but to Anton, it felt like throwing open a window in a stuffy room. Something fresh entered his playing, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. As the sonata progressed into the second movement, with its theme of quiet dignity amid sorrow, Anton thought of Mrs. Chen touching her locket as she spoke of her late husband. What if he played this not as an abstract musical idea, but as a genuine expression of human experience? What if technique served emotion, rather than the other way around? By the time he reached the thunderous final movement, Anton was playing differently than he had in years. His technical mastery remained, but it now served a deeper purpose. The music flowed through him rather than from him. When the final chords resounded through the hall, he felt strangely breathless, as if he had been running or perhaps awakening. The audience erupted in applause more enthusiastic than usual. People rose to their feet, some calling "bravo," as Anton took his bows. From his vantage point on stage, he noticed something unusual. Audience members were exchanging glances, leaning toward each other with comments, their faces showing surprise alongside their appreciation. After the intermission, Anton returned to complete his program with works by Chopin, including the nocturne in E-flat major that Mrs. Chen had played in the master class. As he sat at the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys, he made a small, unplanned adjustment to the program. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the audience directly, something he rarely did during performances. "The next piece holds special meaning for me tonight. I had the privilege of hearing it played this afternoon by a remarkable woman who reminded me why we make music in the first place." A murmur of interest rippled through the audience. "This is for Mrs. Chen," he said simply, before beginning the nocturne. He played it not as a display of virtuosity, but as a gift, both to Mrs. Chen and to himself. The tender melody floated above the gentle accompaniment, each phrase shaped with care rather than calculation. In his mind's eye, he saw not the score but an elderly couple working together in a garden, the husband humming this melody as they tended to growing things. When he finished, the applause seemed different somehow, warmer, more personal. Anton found himself scanning the audience again, wondering if Mrs. Chen had heard his dedication, if she had recognized the change in his playing. The remainder of the concert passed in a kind of heightened state. Anton played the final Chopin ballade with a freedom he hadn't allowed himself in decades. When he struck the final chord, the audience once again leapt to their feet, their ovation more passionate than any he had received in recent memory. After multiple curtain calls, Anton finally left the stage feeling both exhilarated and strangely vulnerable. His assistant met him backstage, her expression a mixture of confusion and excitement. "Maestro, that was different," she said cautiously. "The critics are already buzzing. Everyone's talking about how you played tonight. Good or bad?" Anton asked, genuinely uncertain. "Mostly good. Actually, mostly amazing. But definitely surprised." She handed him a bottle of water. "Oh, and there's someone asking to see you. I told her you don't usually receive visitors after performances, but she insisted I give you her name." Anton already knew. "Mrs. Chen?" His assistant nodded. "She said to tell you that she heard you tonight. Not just your playing, but you." Anton stood quietly for a moment. In the past, he would have refused any backstage visitors, preferring to retreat immediately to the solitude of his hotel room. Tonight, however, felt different. "Where is she?" "Waiting by the stage door with a younger woman, her niece, I think." "Please bring them to the green room," Anton said. "And could you arrange for some tea?" His assistant's surprise was evident, but she nodded and hurried off. A few minutes later, Anton entered the green room to find Mrs. Chen and a woman in her 40s, presumably the niece she had mentioned, waiting for him. Mrs. Chen's face lit up when she saw him. "Maestro." "That was truly beautiful," she said, her eyes bright with emotion, especially the nocturne. "Thomas, thank you for coming," Anton replied, suddenly feeling awkward. In this context, away from the piano, he found himself unsure how to act. The familiar mask of the aloof artist seemed inappropriate now. "I'd like you to meet my niece, Linda," Mrs. Chen said, gesturing to the younger woman. Linda stepped forward, extending her hand. "It's an honor, Maestro Petrovich. My aunt hasn't stopped talking about meeting you yesterday." "The honor is mine," Anton said, surprised to find he meant it. A server arrived with tea, and the three of them sat down. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence filled with the gentle clink of cups on saucers. "You played differently tonight," Mrs. Chen said finally, her directness catching Anton off guard, "especially the Beethoven. I've heard recordings of you playing it before, but tonight it was alive." Anton found himself unable to summon his usual practiced responses about interpretation and artistic choices. "Something changed," he admitted. "After our conversation today," Mrs. Chen smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Music found its way back to you." "Perhaps it did," he agreed quietly. "Aunt May has that effect on people," Linda said warmly. "She sees straight to the heart of things and people." Anton looked at Mrs. Chen May with new interest. "You do seem to have insight that many trained musicians lack." May shook her head modestly. "I just love music for what it is, not for what it can do for me." The simple statement struck Anton like a revelation. For years, music had been his vehicle, to acclaim, to status, to wealth. When had he stopped loving it simply for what it was? "I wish we had more time to talk," he said, surprised by his own sincerity. "Unfortunately, I leave for Toronto tomorrow morning." "The life of a traveling virtuoso," May said with a small smile. "Always moving on to the next performance." "Yes," Anton agreed, though for the first time in years, the thought of his relentless touring schedule felt less like a badge of success and more like a burden. As they finished their tea, Linda mentioned that they should start the drive back to Riverdale. Anton walked them to the stage door where their car waited. "Thank you," he said to May as they prepared to part, "for coming tonight and for reminding me of something important." May regarded him thoughtfully. "Perhaps our paths will cross again, Maestro." "I hope they do," Anton replied, surprised to discover he truly meant it. As their car pulled away, Anton stood alone in the quiet alley behind the concert hall. Tomorrow would bring another city, another concert, another audience, but tonight had changed something fundamental. The question was whether he could hold on to that change or if he would slip back into the comfortable patterns that had defined his career for so long. What he didn't yet realize was that May Chen had more surprises in store, and that their brief encounters, so far, were merely a prelude to a revelation that would leave him truly speechless. 2 weeks and 6 cities later, Anton found himself alone in his hotel room in Chicago, staring at his phone. The screen displayed a text message from his manager. "The New York Times critic called your recent performances revelatory and newly emotional. What's changed?" "Whatever it is, keep doing it." Anton set the phone down without replying. Indeed, something had changed since that night in Clayton City. Each performance since then had felt different, more connected, more alive. Critics had noticed, audiences had responded enthusiastically, and even his recording label had called to discuss a new album project that would capture this evolved artistic voice. Yet despite this professional success, Anton felt unsettled. The brief conversations with May Chen had stirred questions he couldn't easily answer. Questions about why he made music, about what had been lost along his path to fame, about whether technical perfection had become an empty pursuit. His fingers absently tapped the hotel desk, playing an invisible keyboard. Tomorrow he would perform the last concert of this tour leg, and then he had a rare 3-week break before his European tour began. Usually he spent these breaks in his Manhattan apartment, practicing new programs or recording. This time, however, he felt drawn elsewhere. Before he could second-guess himself, he picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Liz, I need you to arrange something." "Of course, Maestro. What do you need?" "Find out if there's a hotel in Riverdale. I want to go back there for a few days." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Riverdale? The small town from the beginning of the tour?" "Yes, I need to follow up on something there. I'll arrange it immediately. When would you like to go?" "The day after tomorrow, after the Chicago performance." "May I ask what this is about?" "The label wants to schedule some meetings during your break and..." Tell them I'm unavailable for the first week. This is important. 2 days later, Anton found himself on a small commuter plane headed back to Riverdale. The decision still felt impulsive, out of character. Throughout his career, he had moved methodically from achievement to achievement, each step carefully planned. Returning to a small town to seek out an elderly piano student was decidedly unplanned. What did he even hope to accomplish? He wasn't entirely sure. Perhaps he simply wanted to thank her for the insight that had transformed his recent performances. Or maybe he sought more of the wisdom she had shared so effortlessly. Whatever the reason, he felt compelled to see her again. The small regional airport was a far cry from the major terminals he usually passed through. No VIP lounges, no staff waiting to escort him to a waiting car, just a simple baggage claim and a rental car counter where the young attendant didn't recognize his name. "In town for business or pleasure, Mr. Petrovich?" she asked as she processed his reservation. "Neither exactly," he replied. "I'm visiting someone." "Well, enjoy your stay in Riverdale. It's not exciting, but it's a nice place." Anton checked into the town's only decent hotel, a far cry from his usual 5-star accommodations, and then sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly uncertain. He hadn't actually made any arrangements to meet May. He didn't have her phone number or address. All he knew was that she volunteered at the community music school. The next morning, Anton walked into the Riverdale Community Music Center, feeling strangely nervous. The director's eyes widened in shock when he recognized the famous visitor. "Maestro Petrovich, what an unexpected honor. Had we known you were coming back to Riverdale, we would have arranged something special." "I'm not here officially," Anton explained. "I was hoping to speak with Mrs. Chen, Mei Chen. Is she here today?" The director's expression shifted subtly. "Mrs. Chen? Oh, I see. Actually, she hasn't been in for about a week. She had some medical tests that tired her out." Anton felt a twinge of concern. "Is she all right?" "I believe so. Nothing serious from what her niece mentioned. Just routine checkups that can be taxing at her age." The director studied Anton curiously. "May I ask why you're looking for her?" How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? "She made an impression on me. I wanted to talk with her again about music." The director nodded, though his expression suggested he found the situation unusual. "I don't have her home address, but she usually volunteers at the children's reading program at the public library on Thursday afternoons. Today is Thursday, so you might find her there." Anton thanked him and left, feeling increasingly self-conscious about his quest. What would people think if they knew the renowned Anton Petrovich was wandering around a small town, searching for an elderly amateur pianist? The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. The public library was a modest brick building near the town center. As Anton entered, a librarian looked up from the front desk, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized him. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to hide her surprise. "I'm looking for Mrs. Mei Chen. I was told she volunteers with the children's reading program. Story time just finished, but Mrs. Chen usually stays to help reshelf the children's books. She should be in the children's section." The librarian pointed toward the back of the building. "Through those doors and to your right." Anton thanked her and walked in the direction indicated. He found himself in a brightly colored room with small tables and chairs, walls covered with children's artwork, and shelves filled with picture books. At first he thought the room was empty, but then he spotted May in a corner carefully arranging books on a low shelf. For a moment, he simply watched her. There was something peaceful about her methodical movements, her obvious care for each book she placed. She wore a simple blue sweater and dark pants, her white hair again in its neat bun. The silver locket still hung around her neck. "Mrs. Chen?" he finally said. She turned, surprise registering on her face before giving way to a warm smile. "Maestro Petrovich, what on earth are you doing in Riverdale? I thought you'd be halfway around the world by now." "I was," he said, approaching her, "but I wanted to speak with you again." "With me?" Her surprise seemed genuine. "Why?" Anton hesitated, feeling suddenly foolish. How could he explain that her simple observations had shaken the foundations of his musical identity? That her unpretentious love of music had made him question decades of his approach to his art? "Your words stayed with me," he said finally. "About remembering the joy in music. About playing from the heart rather than just with technical skill. You changed something in how I play." May's expression softened. "That's very kind of you to say, but surely a great artist like yourself doesn't need advice from someone like me." That's just it, Anton said, lowering himself onto one of the small children's chairs, his knees almost at his chest. I'm beginning to think that being a great artist led me away from what matters in music. May regarded him thoughtfully, then glanced at her watch. I'm finished here. Would you like to continue this conversation over tea? There's a nice cafe just down the street. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a cozy cafe, steam rising from their cups. The other patrons occasionally glanced their way, clearly curious about the distinguished-looking stranger in their midst. But no one approached them, so May said, after they had settled in. You came all the way back to Riverdale to talk about music? Put that way, it did sound absurd. Anton found himself struggling to articulate his reasons. Since our conversations and since that concert you attended, something has changed in my playing. Critics have noticed. Audiences have responded differently. But it's more than that. He paused, searching for the right words. For the first time in years, I felt something while playing, something I had forgotten. May nodded, understanding in her eyes. The music found its way back to your heart. Yes, Anton agreed, relieved that she understood. But I'm afraid I'll lose it again, that I'll slip back into old habits, back to playing notes instead of music. And you thought I might have the answer? May asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Anton smiled ruefully. It sounds presumptuous when you put it that way. Not presumptuous, human. May sipped her tea. We all seek answers outside ourselves sometimes. Do you have them? Anton asked directly. The answers? May laughed softly. Hardly. I'm just an old woman who loves music. But I've lived long enough to know that the things that bring us true joy are rarely the things that bring us acclaim. Anton considered this. I've had acclaim for decades. Joy has been more elusive. Tell me, May said, setting down her cup. Why did you first start playing piano? Not why did you continue? Or why did you pursue it professionally? Why did you first sit down at a keyboard? What drew you to it as a child? The question caught Anton off guard. It had been so long since he had thought about those early days. Before competitions and conservatories, before critics and careers. I loved the sound, he said finally, surprised by the emotion in his voice. The way a single note could hang in the air, the way chords could make you feel something without using words. It seemed like magic to me. And when did the magic become a job? Anton stared into his tea, thinking. Gradually. First, it was about being better than other students, then about winning competitions, then about building a career, securing the right management, getting prestigious bookings. He looked up at her. Somewhere along the way, the music itself became secondary to what it could do for me. May nodded. It happens in many fields. The thing we love becomes the thing we use. How do you avoid that? Anton asked. How have you kept your love of music so pure? May touched her locket absently. Perhaps because I came to it late. Or perhaps because I never had the burden of exceptional talent. She smiled at him. Being merely adequate has its advantages. No one expected greatness from me, so I could simply play for love. You're too modest, Anton said. There was genuine musicality in your playing. Flawed technique, yes, but real understanding. Thank you, she said simply. But I think you came here hoping for some profound secret, and I'm afraid I don't have one to share. Then why did your words affect me so deeply? Why did our brief conversations change how I play? May considered this. Perhaps you were ready to remember what you had forgotten. Perhaps you just needed someone to give you permission to feel music again. Not just play it perfectly. They talked for almost an hour more about music, about life, about the balance between discipline and joy, technique and emotion. Anton found himself speaking more openly than he had in years. There was something about May's presence that invited honesty, that stripped away the practiced persona he had constructed over decades. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Anton felt a strange reluctance. Will you be at the music center tomorrow? I'd like to continue our conversation, May smiled. I'll be there in the afternoon. Perhaps you'd like to play for the children's group? They would be thrilled to hear a real concert pianist. The old Anton would have balked at the suggestion. Playing for a group of children at a community center? Hardly worthy of his stature. But something had shifted in him. I'd be honored, he said, and meant it. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Anton felt lighter somehow, as if he had set down a heavy burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. Tomorrow he would play for children, not critics. The thought filled him with an unfamiliar but welcome feeling. anticipation untainted by anxiety. What he didn't know was that tomorrow would bring far more than a casual performance for children. It would bring a revelation that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about Mei Chen and about himself. The next afternoon, Anton arrived at the Riverdale Community Music Center 15 minutes early. He had spent the morning at the small hotel's out-of-tune piano, preparing a program suitable for children. Pieces that were lively and accessible, yet still demonstrated the beauty of classical music. He felt an unexpected excitement, so different from the controlled focus that usually preceded his performances. The director greeted him with barely concealed amazement. Word had spread quickly through the small town that the famous pianist was not only back, but volunteering to play for children. "We've gathered quite a crowd," the director told him nervously. "Not just the regular children's group. Parents, teachers, some of our adult students, everyone wants to hear you play in this intimate setting." Anton nodded. "That's fine. I'm happy to play for anyone who wants to listen." The director led him to the main room, where about 50 people had gathered. Children sitting cross-legged on the floor near the piano, adults standing along the walls or seated in folding chairs toward the back. Anton scanned the room for Mei but didn't see her. "Mrs. Chen called to say she's running a bit late," the director explained, noticing his search. "Something about needing to pick up some music from her home. She asked us to start without her." Slightly disappointed but understanding, Anton took his seat at the piano. It was a decent upright, not the concert grand he was accustomed to, but that seemed appropriate for today's informal gathering. "Good afternoon," he said to the assembled group. "I'm Anton Petrovich, and I'm delighted to play some music for you today." He glanced down at the children seated near his feet, their faces open and curious. "I thought we might start with a piece by Mozart that tells a story. As I play, see if you can imagine what might be happening in the music." Anton began with Mozart's Rondo alla Turca, its jaunty rhythms and clear melodies perfect for young listeners. As he played, he watched the children's reactions, their smiles, their spontaneous movements to the rhythm, their wide-eyed wonder when he played particularly fast passages. Their unfiltered enjoyment was refreshing, so different from the measured, sophisticated applause of his usual audiences. After the Mozart, he played a Chopin waltz, then a piece by Schumann from Scenes from Childhood. For each selection, he took a moment to explain something about the music in simple terms, inviting the children to listen for specific elements or to share what images the music brought to mind. Between pieces, the back door opened quietly and Anton glanced up to see Mei slipping into the room. She carried a worn leather portfolio under her arm and moved to stand against the back wall. She caught his eye and smiled, giving a small wave. Anton felt an unexpected warmth at her arrival. "For my next piece," he announced, "I'd like to play something that has new meaning for me, thanks to someone special in this room." He looked directly at Mei. "This is Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." As he played, Anton poured into the music all the realizations and emotions of the past few weeks, the rediscovery of joy in music, the recognition of what had been lost in his pursuit of perfection, the gratitude for the unexpected wisdom from an elderly woman in a small town. His performance was both technically brilliant and deeply felt, the combination he had been searching for without realizing it. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence before applause filled the room. Anton looked up to see several adults wiping away tears while the children simply beamed with delight. "Are there any questions?" Anton asked, turning especially to the children. Hands shot up immediately. The questions were refreshingly straightforward. How fast can you play? Do your fingers get tired? How do you remember all those notes? Anton answered each one with the same seriousness he would give to a question from a music critic, finding unexpected pleasure in the children's curiosity. After about 40 minutes, the director stepped forward to announce that the formal program was concluding, though Maestro Petrovich had graciously agreed to stay for a while to speak with anyone who wished. As people gathered around the piano, Anton looked for Mei. She stood back from the crowd, watching with a gentle smile. When their eyes met, she held up the portfolio she had brought, then gestured toward a side room, indicating she would wait for him there. It took Anton nearly half an hour to speak with everyone who wanted a moment of his time. He signed programs, answered more questions, and promised the music students that yes, practice really was essential. Finally, he was able to excuse himself and make his way to the side room where May waited. She sat at a small table, the leather portfolio placed before her. "That was beautiful," she said as he entered. "Especially the nocturne. You played it as Chopin intended, from the heart." "Thank you," Anton said, taking the seat across from her. "It felt different, better." He nodded toward the portfolio. "What's this you've brought?" May placed her hand on the worn leather. "This is why I was late. After our conversation yesterday, I realized there was something I should show you." She took a deep breath. "But first, I need to tell you something about myself that I haven't shared." Anton leaned forward, intrigued. "You assumed, as most people do, that I'm simply an elderly woman who took up piano late in life," she began. "That's partly true. I did indeed begin formal lessons only after my husband passed away. But my relationship with music goes back much further." She carefully opened the portfolio, revealing yellowed newspaper clippings, old programs, and faded photographs. "I was born in Shanghai," she continued. "My father was a music professor at the conservatory there. From my earliest memories, our home was filled with music. I began playing piano at age 4. Anton's expression showed his surprise, but he remained silent as she continued. "By age 10, I was considered something of a prodigy. My father had plans for me to study in Europe, to become a concert pianist." She pointed to one of the newspaper clippings, written in Chinese but with a photograph showing a young Asian girl seated at a grand piano. "That was me after winning a national competition in 1958. Anton studied the photograph, struggling to reconcile the poised young pianist in the image with the elderly woman sitting across from him. "What happened?" he asked finally. "History happened," May replied simply. "The Cultural Revolution began. Western classical music was denounced as bourgeois. My father was sent to a labor camp. I stopped playing publicly. It became dangerous." She turned a page in the portfolio, revealing more clippings and photos. "When I was 18, I managed to leave China, coming to America as a refugee student. I had hoped to continue my musical education here, but..." She touched her locket. "I met Henry, my husband. We fell in love, married young. Money was tight. I took a job as a librarian to help support us while he finished his engineering degree." "You gave up music?" Anton asked, trying to understand. "Not entirely. I played at home on an old upright piano. I taught a few students privately. But the path to becoming a concert pianist, that dream faded away. Life took me in different directions." She turned another page, revealing a program from a small recital. "This was the last formal performance I gave at a local church fundraiser in 1976. After that, work and family consumed my time." Anton felt a growing sense of disbelief. "But you're playing at the master class. The technical limitations," May smiled sadly. "Arthritis has taken its toll on my hands over the years. And decades without proper training or practice have left their mark. What technique I once had has largely abandoned me." She reached deeper into the portfolio and withdrew a small, clear plastic case. Inside was an old cassette tape labeled in neat handwriting. "Shanghai Conservatory Final Recital, Mei Li Chen, 1964. This is the only recording I have of my playing from those early years. My father managed to save it and sent it to me years later, after relations with China improved." Anton stared at the cassette. "Have you listened to it recently?" "Not for many years," May admitted. "It's painful sometimes to be reminded of what might have been." Anton felt a strange tightening in his chest. May I hear it?" May hesitated, then nodded. "The director has an old cassette player in his office. I asked earlier if we might use it." 20 minutes later, they sat together in the director's small office. The door closed for privacy. The ancient cassette player whirred and clicked as the tape began to play. The sound quality was poor, with the static and hiss common to old recordings. But what emerged through the noise made Anton's breath catch. The playing was extraordinary, especially considering it came from a teenager. Not just technically accomplished, though it certainly was that, but played with a depth of emotion and understanding that belied the performer's age. The piece was Beethoven's Appassionata, the same sonata Anton had performed in Clayton City. But where his interpretations had always emphasized precision and control, this young pianist played with both technical brilliance and raw emotional power. As the recording continued, Anton found himself leaning closer to the small speaker, straining to hear every nuance through the tape's imperfections. The musicality was undeniable, the potential enormous. This was the playing of someone who could have had an international career, who could have been among the greats of her generation. When the tape finally clicked off, neither spoke for several long moments. You could have been, Anton began, unable to complete the thought. Famous? Acclaimed? Perhaps May acknowledged without regret. But life offered me different gifts instead. A loving marriage, work that helped others, the chance to share music with children who might not otherwise experience it. Don't you ever regret it? Anton asked, thinking of the single-minded dedication with which he had pursued his own career, sacrificing relationships, family, and at times it seemed, his very humanity. May touched her locket gently. I've had moments of wondering what if, but regret? No. She looked directly at him. The question isn't whether I regret not becoming famous. The question is whether you regret what you sacrificed to become famous. The words hit Anton with unexpected force. What had he sacrificed? Personal relationships, certainly. The possibility of family. And somewhere along the way, the pure joy that had first drawn him to music. I don't know, he answered honestly. Until recently, I would have said no regrets. Now I'm less certain. May closed the portfolio gently. I didn't show you this to make you question your choices. I showed you because I wanted you to understand something important. What's that? Anton asked. That when I spoke about music finding its way back to your heart, I wasn't speaking from ignorance or naive enthusiasm. I was speaking from experience, from knowing what it means to play with both technical skill and genuine emotion, from understanding what's truly valuable in music, beyond acclaim or recognition. Anton sat back, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath him. This woman he had initially dismissed as a simple amateur, whose playing he had condescendingly critiqued, had once possessed talent that rivaled his own. Yet rather than becoming bitter about opportunities lost, she had found ways to keep music in her life, to share it generously, to preserve the joy that had first drawn her to the piano. I misjudged you completely, he said finally. May smiled. Most people do. They see an old woman with limited technique and assume there's nothing more to know. I'm sorry, Anton said sincerely. Don't be. Your arrogance provided me an opportunity to help you remember something important about music. And yourself? Anton looked at her with new respect. You've given me a great gift, May. I'm not sure how to thank you. Play, she said simply. Not just with your hands, but with your heart. Remember why you began, what you loved before fame became the goal. That's thanks enough. As they left the office together, Anton realized something had permanently changed within him. His upcoming European tour would proceed as planned. But he would play differently now. Not just technically brilliant performances, but music that spoke from his newly reawakened heart. I have to leave tomorrow, he told May as they parted. But I'd like to stay in touch, perhaps visit again when my schedule allows. I'd like that, she replied warmly. 6 months later, Anton Petrovich gave what critics would later call the performance of his career at Carnegie Hall. The program included a piece he had never performed publicly before, a simple, Chinese folk melody arranged for piano, dedicated to MC, who reminded me why we make music. In the audience that night sat an elderly woman with white hair and a silver locket, flown in as the guest of honor. As applause thundered through the hall, Anton looked directly at her, his expression conveying what words could not. Gratitude for the wisdom of a simple woman that had left him, and everyone who heard him play truly speechless.